I'd actually like to get to the 1967 war, right? The thing that in many people's minds, at least the older generation, right, since the younger generation generally doesn't know much about it, just like they don't know much about, say, the Vietnam War or such, the kind of war that solidifies in most Israelis' minds sort of the idea that Israel was just fighting for its life, fighting for defense against belligerent Arab nations, and how that is really not true. So okay, so what happened in what's the basic setup for the 67 war? There's a war on three fronts, right? With Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. Some of the things that I'm going to be drawing upon come from, again, Norman Finkelstein's book, a guy who has read more than 50 books on the 1967 war, right? He is basically the foremost expert on Arab-Israeli, call it the Israeli conflict, the history of that in the America. Um, Very, very learned, very detailed oriented scholar. And throughout this, right, he's kind of foil. The position that he's sort of arguing against is the standard one that is represented by Abba Eban, who was basically the voice for Israel in much of the 60s and later about defending Israel's actions and representing it in the foreign community. He was the ambassador to the United States, the UN permanent representative. He was a lecturer, statesman and such, right? Wrote memoirs and such. And so probably if there's anyone that one would sort of point to for a defense of this quote standard narrative about Israeli self-defense, it would go back to him, right? So this is sort of what Finkelstein is arguing against. Um, so you know, I mean, so there's sort of a conflict on three fronts, right? There's one on the Jordanian side, the Syrian side, and the Egyptian side. And the Jordanian side is probably more complicated than the other ones, but it's, my understanding is it's the one that's sort of where the conflict starts first. Um, so, yes, in, the years before, Palestinian armed fighters are crossing over the border, and Jordan is tasked with, stopping these guys from coming through. Part of the reason that this war in '67 starts there is precisely because these guys are coming over. And on the one hand, of course, um, Jordan is actually trying its best to stop the fighters from coming over. As UN military observers say, basically, Jordan's efforts to curb the infiltrators, these Palestinian militias, militants, it reached near total capacity of the country to do that, basically. In fact, until the 1967 war, more Palestinians were killed by Jordanian soldiers who were attempting to enter Israel than among the Israelis themselves, right? And even, right a few months before this so-called Samu attack, which I'll talk about, King Hussein had taken the extraordinary steps to arrest most of the PLO's staff in Amman and closed its offices. Now, the big event here, right, which kind of accelerates the conflict and ultimately poisons relations between some of the Arab countries, is what is called the Samu raid, or Samu attack, right? As Finkelstein says, Samu's main legacy was the poisoning of relations and exacerbating of already bitter rivalries in the Arab world. As one historian observed, by its raid on Samu, Israel, as a no date calculated, sharpened Arab divisions, radicalized opinions, and set its lamentably weak and hopelessly quarrelsome neighbors, lurching amid mutual plots and accusations to the very edge of the precipice. So, not that it's the most important detail, but we should remember, right? It's not like there was a well coordinated attack by the Arab countries of Israel, and that they were all sort of on a single mind, right? They fought amongst themselves, they had different objectives and such, but that's just a rather small point. But what's this? Let's see here. What are we getting to?